okay, this is different. Just being barefoot adds a new element of challenge and difficulty and sense of awareness of my body that I had never fully embraced. I was kind of just like going back to different spots. Like, okay, I think I can do this. So I'm kind of like figuring out what I can do barefoot and what I can't. And that in itself has been a whole process. The technique changes, how you land changes, how you absorb, how your body reacts to landings change.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Evolve Move Play podcast. This week, I'm super excited to share my conversation with Mathieu Jang with you. Matt is an amazing mover, and you're going to really get a lot out of this conversation. However, there's something on the Evolve Move Play front that we need to share before we move on to the episode, which is that you can sign up for one of our retreats right now. So if you know anything about Evolve Move Play, you probably know that we offer week-long and longer retreats that are at the center point of what we do. It's where we bring together the combination of movement, mindfulness, nature connection, and community, and the full spectrum of movement, from body integrity practices to body to environment practices to body to object practices and body to body practices. There is no other event that covers this full holistic ecology of practices like what we do. And it's become something that's attracting people from all over the world, even academics who are coming to look at what we're doing, as well as some of the best parkour athletes in the world. But it doesn't matter what your current level of skill is, you're welcome. We have had people at every level, and our method works really well for spanning gaps of skill. So if you're interested in joining us and experiencing what Evolve Move Play is all about for yourself, you want to go ahead and jump on an application call with me sometime in the next couple of weeks. The early bird discount for Spring Retreat and Return to the Source is ending on March 1st. And Return to the Source is almost sold out already. With only 2 spots left. And I expect that as you're listening to this, it's going to be getting close to a sellout. So if you want any chance of getting on it, you need to get on an application call and talk to me in the next couple of days. So I look forward to hearing from many of you and enjoying your presence at our event. These are small events with only 20 people. And 5 coaches, as well as 2 staff who help take care of you. So it's a small, intimate event. It's an extraordinary experience of going deep into the wilds of the nature here in Northwest Washington and into a movement practice unlike anything else. So if you love what Evolve Move Play is all about, jump on a call and see if an event is right for you this year. I hope to speak to you soon. Without further ado, enjoy my conversation with Mathieu Jang. Matt, nice to meet you. Nice to finally get a chance to talk to you. Welcome to the Evolve Move Play podcast.
Yeah, cool. It's good to be here. Good to finally meet you and talk face to face, virtually, but that'll do.
Yeah, you've been coming up to the Northwest the last few years, and we just have kind of missed each other. So that's too bad. So hopefully this year we'll get to jump around in the trees together.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah, that'll be fun. So yeah, let's just kind of start with your background. My understanding is you've been doing parkour for quite a long time now, like 15 plus years.
I think this is the beginning. I started in 2008, so I think this is my 15th year. Yeah,
15th year. Okay.
So it's been a minute. Yeah, for sure.
And you started in Hong Kong.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you started in Hong Kong. You're training out there. You got involved in, it seemed like there was a team that you were involved in, or a project called For the Love of the City.
Oh yeah. Not really a team, but let's see, how do I start? In Hong Kong back in the day, there weren't too many videos or just groups of people doing parkour, and I was watching videos of, the London guys, Urban Free Flow, and I was like, it'd be cool to showcase what people in Hong Kong were doing. I didn't really know anyone, so I was like, okay, I'll just film some of my stuff. I think I was 2 years in or so, and I was like, I never really liked the city until I found parkour. So I was like, okay, I made a YouTube channel. It's like, okay, what do I call it? Like, I'll call it For the Love of the City, because parkour was, my newfound love for the city, and I started making videos and then made some compilations, and a few of them kind of took off in the community, and yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I've kind of seen is I've known your name for a long time as somebody who's in the community, who's a very skillful athlete. But sometime in the last, I don't know, 2 years, like your profile kind of exploded. And it was, I was looking back through, and I really associated with you as like taking on moving in nature, which is really cool because that's obviously my passion. And so it's been fun to watch you and Leo Urban sort of just like blow up through that. But I was looking back through your Instagram and I noticed that it's there's a lot of urban stuff still, but really kind of a specialization in ascents and descents. Then obviously you've gone to the barefoot and bare chested, kind of have an iconic brand appearance now that's that's associated with you. So it's just kind of interesting because I remember you as the For the Love of the City guy and traveling doing that, and then kind of took this other tack, which has been really successful for you in building awareness of what you're doing. You know, I think you're probably one of the bigger Instagram channels right now for parkour, getting featured in all sorts of interesting spaces as a real life Tarzan type. So how did that evolution happen? Was that strategic? Were you trying to like find a little bit of a unique brand to try and go grab your profile, or was it just that's what you got into and happened to fit where the algorithm was?
I get this question asked of me a lot, and I feel like my response is always a little different because there's so many factors, there's so many angles to which led me to be on this journey. But I think from the beginning of my training, I'd always been training barefoot to a degree. I just wouldn't film it because, you know, when I first started, I had, you know, I looked up to the Europeans, you know, the baggy sweats, the moving in, you know, really urban environments. And so those were the movements or the style, the look that I aspired to, you know, to be like, to achieve. And I really pushed those things, which were really great at the time. And a lot of my barefoot stuff would, you know, I would train barefoot warming up and then eventually put my shoes on. And then, you know, I obviously had sweats on and a shirt on, but so there's that. So I was always training barefoot. And in addition to that, if I look back on my 15 years of training, they've come in kind of waves. My first few years were, you know, big power moves. All I wanted to do was see how far I could, you know, precision jump, see how far I could Kong cat, Kong pre, just one move, but I had zero flow. So after a number of years of that, you know, I would train with some guys who, you know, didn't have big jumps, but they would have like amazing flow. And I was like, oh, wow, like, you know, big jumps, you know, they're practical to some sense, but like if I can't move through an environment well and fluidly, then those big jumps kind of like don't really matter, because it's all about when you're doing those big jumps, you're spacing yourself out perfectly so you can do that one move. But if you're faced with a number of obstacles, you're going to have to be a little more, how would you put it? Intuitive with your movement, or instinctual, rather than, okay, I'm going to have these many steps before this big jump here or there. You know, it's like I have 3 obstacles, I have to move between them fast and efficiently with fluidity. And so the next few years I focused on flow. So I wasn't doing as many big jumps. I was just moving through environments as fluidly as I could, using, you know, transitional movements, taking a lot of inspiration from Foskey, from a lot of the Gup guys, Spanish guys in particular, lots of flow. And after that season, I was watching German parkour videos all the time, and they were doing all these very technical, specific, you know, strange landings, all sorts of things. So I went through a season of doing that. And then after that, I went through a season of kind of, okay, I have all these pieces to the puzzle. Let me combine all those things. And I did that for a number of years. And I had traveled quite a bit all over the world and taking bits of inspiration from a lot of different places. And then in 2019, I came back from being here for about 6 months.
Being where?
I was in Europe.
Oh, in Europe. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And I was looking for maybe, I don't even know if I was looking, but I think a part of me was looking for something different. I had felt like I'd experimented with a lot of different styles and movement techniques, and I wanted to find something else. And I'd been training in Hawaii for quite a while, and all the challenges I had done there, I would go to a spot and, I wouldn't have any inspiration to do anything new because I'm like, yeah, I've kind of, in my mind, I've done everything I could do here. And so I will kind of just, show up to jams and maybe just sit there like, yeah, I'm kind of very uninspired. And then COVID hit and we were all jobless for a while, and we're in Hawaii, it's good weather. I'm just running around the mountains and stuff, barefoot, no shirt. And these are things I was already doing, just not while I was doing parkour. Ever since I moved I moved to Hawaii in 2010. And from that point on, I was kind of introduced to, moving barefoot more, being very primal. The friends I had made, we would run in the woods in the rain barefoot, shirtless, yelling, jumping to streams and rivers. And so that was always something that we did. That just never translated into parkour until COVID, because I was doing all those things again. And then I'd be like, okay, now I want to train. And I would, drive to a spot with my shoes under my seat and be like, okay, now it's time to train. Let me put my shoes on. And then it got to a point where I was like, I don't think I need these. I just came from the mountains barefoot, no shirt, hair down. I don't need to put my shoes on just to do parkour. So I started training barefoot. And that was one factor. Another factor, during COVID, I hurt my big toe.
Yeah.
So I wasn't able to take big impacts for a while. So I was like, okay, what can I do that's parkour that's not a lot of impact? Like, climbing. As long as I don't fall and take a drop, I can climb. So these two things kind of like intersected. Okay, I'm now training barefoot. My foot's hurt, so I'm just going to do ascents. And then eventually descents that don't have so much impact. So having an injured big toe, I was like, I can't fail, basically. I can't take the drop because my foot can't handle it. So, I would go to a spot and like find a route or do a route that I had already done with shoes on. Be like, okay, this is my approach. This is what I need to do. This is how I need to handle this part of the movement. This is how my feet need to adjust. And I would execute. And people ask me, do you fall? And yeah, I do fall. But like in that period, I didn't fall. I never fell because I couldn't. I just couldn't because my foot was hurt. So I was like, okay, this is different. Just being barefoot adds a new element of challenge and difficulty and sense of awareness of my body that I had never fully embraced. I think prior to that, I had dabbled in it.
Yeah.
I mentioned before, I would warm up barefoot, but never like would do a full on, training session barefoot. But now like, okay, this is a thing. I can do this. Let's see how many of the challenges I've done here in Hawaii, how many of them can I do barefoot? So I was kind of just like going back to different spots. I'm like, okay, I think I can do this. So I'm kind of like figuring out what I can do barefoot and what I can't. And that in itself has been a whole process because the technique changes, how you land changes, how you absorb, how your body reacts to landings change, as you probably know. And so, so that's kind of how that originated and how I took off on Instagram. I was already doing those things. So I was thinking, it would be fun to make a a YouTube video where I'm, showcasing this method of training, and I think it would be fun. And so I originally planned to just save those clips and then release a 2-minute YouTube video. But last minute, I decided to upload to Instagram. And my first upload, uploaded to Instagram, I got like 50 followers. I was like, okay, I've never gotten that many followers off of one post. And, let me just keep posting and then see what happens. And I made another post and it got 60 followers. And I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I'll just keep doing it and maybe something will take off. Another post, 70 followers. I was like, okay. And I was talking to people at the time, because this is when Instagram Reels started, becoming a thing. And I was talking to some guys and, asking, should I post regular posts or should I post Reels? And I was talking to David Nelms.
Okay.
And he was saying Instagram is trying to basically overtake TikTok, and they're popping their algorithm with that, and you should post Reels. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really like how the format is, it's vertical, but I've been doing more descents and ascents now, and that's vertical, so I guess that's perfect. So I thought, like, okay, what's an ascent I can do that's like relatively easy that I can do barefoot? And I went out, and it was raining, actually. People don't know this, but the initial video that took off, it just had started to rain. And I was like, I can just do it. So, and that was actually part of the reason. It's funny, people say, it's fast or whatever, but part of the reason was because it was raining and I needed to get up, before everything got wet.
Yeah. You had a sense of urgency.
Yeah, exactly. So, I did it, and I was like, okay, cool. Let me just post it, and got like 100K views, and I was like, okay, this is cool. And then maybe 100 followers, and I was like, okay, people like this. So I just kept posting, and then a week later that video blew up. It hit 1 million views, and then that was kind of exciting.
Yeah.
People were tagging someone in the comments. Like, it was probably hundreds of comments tagging this one person. I had no idea who this person was. And my account had probably grown to, I was at 3K. It had grown to probably 40K in a matter of a few weeks. And then one day it just shot up and went from like 40 to 100K. And I was like, whoa, what is going on? And so it's like, maybe it was that one guy that people were tagging. So I looked, found the tag, went to his profile, and this guy has 54 million followers. And he's a Brazilian YouTuber.
Okay.
And he has long hair.
Oh, there you go.
So people were tagging him in the video saying, oh, it's, so-and-so. And what ended up happening was, he was getting bombarded with so many comments. He ended up reposting. And from that repost, I, got like 60K in like 2 days. And then, it slowly died off. And then, yeah.
So your resemblance to a Brazilian YouTuber you didn't know was a viral driver for you. That's hilarious.
Yeah. And it's all interesting, the timing, because for a lot of people who have been training for as long as I have, a lot of people have accumulated like 10K. I was like, okay, that it'd be cool to reach 10K, but I was like, I'm just enjoying movement now. I'm not trying to push myself as I used to. I just, have fun and work on my weaknesses, but not, take it too seriously. And kind of had given up hitting 10K. And it was only after I like had kind of died to myself, like, okay, number's a number. It's not really a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
It was only at that point did my account blow up.
That's funny.
And greatly surpassed 10K.
So you're in grad school right now, right?
Yes.
So what are you in grad school for?
Yeah. I am studying psychology. I'm getting my master's in clinical counseling.
Okay, cool. So you have a real job on the horizon.
Yes. A real job, but honestly, I think it's, so much of my life has been intertwined with parkour. Like it's all the same to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like what I'm doing now is parkour because parkour is about facing obstacles, and I've never been academically inclined my whole life, and it has been an obstacle for me. And so, in thinking about training your weaknesses and trying to be better as a person, I was like, okay, I will go to grad school because I know it's going to be a challenge and it's going to be stretching and is one of the greatest obstacles that I will probably overcome in my lifetime. So that coupled with a lot of other things, but definitely.
I'm just curious, like you basically kind of sounds like you sort of fell into having a huge following. Now there's going to be opportunities that are associated with that. And I'm curious, like, are you pursuing those opportunities? Is it just sort of like, hey, cool, I'm a guy who has a giant following and I'm just going to keep climbing things because it's fun? Or
opportunities have presented themselves to me, but I think ultimately I've never wanted parkour to become full-time for me. It's always been something that has been utilized as a tool to drive other things that I wanted to pursue in life.
Yeah.
And so similarly now, it's definitely more, doing parkour has become more important, but not, it's still like next to and under like getting my degree, pursuing more long-term career path. And so I think now it's a matter of just balancing those two. And I'm very particular with what opportunities that I pick up. I want to do things that represent the sport well, or what it means to me well. But of course, sometimes you just need money. So it's kind of a tricky thing to navigate. But yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely been tricky for the whole community. So let me see. I was really starting to pay attention to what you're doing recently because you were moving in trees, and that was really exciting to me. So I'm curious how much the kind of like the stuff that went viral was actually the building climbing, the rapid ascents and descents versus the movement in trees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, short answer is definitely the movement in buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the short answer. As I was posting more content, I was like, okay, trying to figure out what people like. And I'd always been moving in trees like on the side, but never like as a form of, I don't know, I don't want to say legitimate training, but I wouldn't train to form lines in the trees or move in a certain way. Only after I blew up to, I'm like, okay, I have these pieces, let's put them together and see what happens. And I think people like it, but people definitely like the whole like, oh, Tarzan escaped the jungle and is now living in the city thing. Which it's interesting. I think in a lot of ways, I think of what I'm doing as like an art. It's like a contrast, We're so used to seeing parkour done in the city in very, very city, clothing, whatever.
Yeah.
And you're not used to seeing someone who looks like they're from the tropics moving in an urban environment. So I don't know, maybe if I were to wear a suit in the trees, it'd be like, oh, it's someone that came from the city. But,
Yeah. I kind of want to wear a suit in the trees.
yeah.
Keep thinking about getting like a nicely tailored parkour suit. You got it back there?
Oh, no.
So I'm curious about how you started with the barefooting, because I was influenced by the paleo community and the rise of barefoot running. All that stuff was happening 2005, Chris McDougall, Born to Run. I ran into Barefoot Ted, he was in Seattle, all that stuff. So I started barefooting, and also Georges Hubert, right? Because all my stuff was really influenced by Méthode Naturelle. So I started barefooting in 2006, I think. And I was really into it. Interestingly, so have you seen my video Tree Runner that I came out with in 2012, 2013?
I may have seen clips of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Probably, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the, kind of my big statement of tree parkour barefoot. And my feet were hurting a lot during the filming of that. Like, I would go out for a film session and my feet would just get worn out. And then I would actually wear my shoes all week, like during my life, so that my foot would be ready to try to like train the next time that I was going to film. Right.
Yeah.
So like after that, I was like, well, that was kind of dumb. I like being barefoot most of the time. So I'll wear my shoes a little bit more when I'm training. And then when I started traveling, teaching Evolve Move Play, I just realized that like if I had a seminar that weekend and I like punctured my foot, it was going to be a really, really sad day. So I ended up kind of doing, mostly I would warm up and I would do light training. I do light flow barefoot and try to incorporate that a lot, and then just try to live barefoot as much as possible. But when I was going to do heavy impact training, I was always putting my shoes on after that.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting to watch what you've accomplished barefoot. I recently started to have a conversation with Leo on the podcast. Unfortunately, his internet died, so we're going to have to refilm it later. Leo Urban, but he's accomplished a lot barefoot. And so it's kind of interesting to me. And specifically, I've stubbed my toes really badly a couple of times. And that's been like, it just really makes it hard to do that. And specifically climbing. So I'm interested in how you injured your toe that made climbing feel good. Because for me, the dorsiflexion that you have to possess to barefoot climb on flat walls, in your toe is really extreme. And having had those toe injuries, that's what's actually really the hardest for me. So I'm curious about how kind of you sustain the health of your feet over time, how you got interested in barefooting at the stage that you got interested in it, and how you preserve the health of your feet.
Yeah. Good questions. If I think back to the beginning, I think I was, here and there I would run around barefoot in Hong Kong when I was like at the beach or in the mountains, but not too much. And it wasn't until I was in New York once, I forget what year, but I met a Danish guy, and he was like, oh, I always warm up barefoot. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. So I started warming up barefoot, and I think that's the earliest time I remember like specifically training parkour barefoot. And then I moved to Hawaii, and we would mainly wear shoes, but taking them off was always incorporated into our practice. So there was always kind of like this balance of like half and half. We'll do some things barefoot, we'll do some things with shoes on. Obviously, like it's just better to, protect your feet when you're doing certain movements, and other movements you don't need to worry about that. And I think similarly now, I'm not always training barefoot for sure.
Yeah.
There are movements, big impact movements that I want to do and not want to worry about destroying my feet. And so I always have my shoes with me, but it's like now I think of shoes as a tool. It's not necessarily like I go to train with my shoes. It's like I go to train. I don't even want to say barefoot. I go to train, and if I want to do something barefoot, I will do it barefoot. And if I want to do something with shoes on, I will do it with shoes on. And it's just very dependent on what I want to do and what I want to achieve. And as far as like the maintenance of my feet, it wasn't really until probably, one, moving to Hawaii and doing a lot of hikes barefoot. That was probably the start of it. And then COVID doing that. Yeah, COVID doing that even more and more. So I was, doing a lot of hikes barefoot, and again, like I said, would go to training sessions and be like, okay, I don't need my shoes anymore. So now I do to maintain my feet. Honestly, I don't do that much. I will try to be barefoot as much as I can. I will try to hike barefoot as much as I can. Every once in a while will use a massage gun to massage my feet, but that's not very often either. I lift barefoot. I think honestly, just trying to be barefoot as much as I can.
Yeah.
And just learning how to land barefoot. Those have been big things for me.
Have you had any like abrasions, tears on your feet, splinters, puncture wounds? Have you, smashed your toes on stuff while you're training?
I tore up my big toe pretty good. This like a year ago on a wall. But I learned that was because I'd started that session with shoes on, and then I'd taken them off, and this was a big thing for me. I realized that there needs to be a period that your feet need to, I don't know, acclimate to being barefoot after you're taking your shoes off, because you wear shoes, your feet are hot and they're slightly moist, and they're more susceptible to tears, to punctures. And so what I do when I take off my shoes, I'm rubbing my feet like on the ground, trying to absorb dirt to dry them off. I'm stomping my feet to like prepare them to like take impact. And that has been actually huge for me, like just realizing that it needs to be a period of time, usually 10 or 20 minutes that you need to take after you've taken your shoes off to acclimate your feet to being barefoot and to taking impact. So when I tore my foot, I'd taken my shoes off, and I had done this climb once, and I was like, okay, this is really easy. I took my shoes off and immediately went for it, and I stepped off this wall. It's a brick wall, and my foot caught the edge of a brick, and it just took all the skin off.
Yeah.
It was like lots of blood. And I was like, wow, I'm really surprised that happened, because I know my feet can take that. And I was like, I wonder what happened. I was like, oh, my feet were just still moist and, not fully dried or prepared for that. So now that I am aware of that, I take proper precautions, and there's definitely a lot of things that I know can be, a lot of like very interesting things. Like I won't try land on a wall if it's a big jump, unless it has some sort of bevel, let's say I'm learning. Like if it has a sharp edge, I just won't try to land on it barefoot.
Yeah.
If it has a bevel, it's no problem. If it's a rail, no problem, because those sharp edges are what tear up your feet. And so if you do watch my videos, like you can kind of tell like there's like a pattern to what I'm doing. A lot of the jumps are upwards, so I'm not taking that downward impact. So you're kind of landing and rolling up. Same with the climbs. Like basically a lot of my movement has gone towards like going up or not landing on edges and not sticking things, because sticking things really hurts your feet.
Yeah.
Especially to a sharp edge.
Yeah.
So a lot of my movements, like you see me hit the wall and I'm running out, because instead of hitting the edge, I try to avoid hitting the edge at all costs, because you can't do that barefoot. You have to land on top. That way, you're not, hurting your ball of your foot. So you see a lot of my jumps, I'm landing on the top and kind of running off.
Yeah. That's interesting, because I did almost all my barefoot training was, not all of it. I definitely did some barefoot training in the city when I was working at Parkour Visions. But once I left and created Evolved Move Play, it was all in nature. And there was basically not so many 90-degree ledges in nature. So like, it feels, jumping to a tree branch is pretty great. Jumping to a lot of boulders is pretty great as far as being able to land on your foot. And not have that, like, there's just not a good way to orient your foot particularly. I mean, I guess it just has to be insanely resilient to take a hard landing to a concrete edge.
Yeah.
Unless you
I think, over the course of the last 2 years, my feet have definitely like become so much stronger. Like it surprises me like what my feet can take, and it's all a matter of checking in with myself and checking in with my feet and just being like, okay, can you handle this today? Can you not? Do I need to put my shoes back on? But yeah, like if people in LA who see me coming to session, like I have my shoes on sometimes, I have my shoes off. And so
do you rehearse lines that you intend to film barefoot with shoes on and then take your shoes off later in the process?
Sometimes, yes. It just depends. Yeah, it just depends. If I'm trying a line and I have like, there's some lines I'm like, okay, I know I can do this barefoot, so I don't need to do that. But there are other lines where like, okay, I don't know how this is gonna feel if I'm barefoot, so I'll do it with shoes on first and test it out. And then, okay, this all feels very good and familiar, and the only thing I need to adjust is like taking into account that I will be doing it barefoot.
Okay. Have you noticed, one thing I noticed when I switched to barefoot was that like the optimal part of the ball of my foot that I wanted to land on was actually more forward than in a shoe. Like I find that in a shoe, I tend to want to land slightly behind the ball of the foot, like on the posterior portion of the ball of the foot. Whereas somehow a lot of times in barefooting, I want to be kind of in between the front of the ball of the foot and the toes without getting too far in the toes. Have you noticed that?
Yes, definitely. I wouldn't say like towards the front, but like more just like right in the middle of the ball of the foot. Like that's like the sweet spot, right in the middle. That way you hit that edge and you just kind of roll up to top. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because like in different places, like if you go to different jams in different countries, they'll tell you what is the optimal way to land. And one of the things that stood out to me was when I was in Spain, their methodology, I don't know if it's the same now, but their methodology was, their belief was the least amount of foot that you use to land on a wall, the better and more aesthetic it looks. So they aim to land on their toes, like the first phalange, the first knuckle. And anything that's like past the ball of the foot, they tell you to do it again. They're like, that doesn't count, do it again. I remember that. I remember sitting there like watching these Spanish guys move, and it would all land like on the toes. I'm like, wow, how is that even how did I even do that? But
Man, that toe slip is terrible. You got to avoid that.
yeah,
So like if you're too far on the front of your toes, like your toes will just give in. They're not that strong. And then when you slip out there, you go to your shin really fast.
yeah, yeah.
But I did find that basically like taking heel strikes in barefoot is so much more damaging when you hit an edge with your heel. And so you got to kind of buffer it a little bit further towards the toe to make sure you're not going to take that heel strike, because that can put you out for a couple of weeks, a good heel bruise.
Yeah, for sure. Like I'm constantly running on the ball of my feet. And it's funny because some of the comments are, oh, he hurt himself because I finished a line and I'm running out and I'm running on the balls of my feet. And it looks like, if you hurt yourself, you're kind of like,
Yeah.
you know, kind of like dancing it off or whatever. But no, I'm just running on the ball of my foot, trying to like come out of something as light as I can. And my heels like rarely hit the ground because that just hurts.
So do you do like big tongue vaults, for instance, or front flips, like split foot style front flips, barefoot on the ground?
Yeah, I can do those.
There you kind of have to anchor off the heel on that back foot usually. Have you noticed that, or have we been able to avoid that?
I don't really do flips off of flat ground, but I will do them off ledges. But when I do land, I have to land on the ball of the foot or land on soft grass or
landing. Yeah, but so what I'm talking about is the split step, right? On the split step, you got to roll through the heel at least on the back leg.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do it. You can line it up. I've found that I can do it on concrete barefoot. And I'm going to slap that heel down and roll. But it has to do with how fast my center of mass is moving over it. So I'm not getting a huge braking action on the heel, and then I'm okay. And I do it with power. But it's just interesting because, a lot of times we start talking about like being just totally ball of the foot dominant when we're barefoot. But, like if you were to try to dunk a basketball barefoot, you're still going to have to use your heel to anchor down and get those hamstrings and glutes really firing properly.
Yeah, I've learned that if I do have to use my heel, I have to just be very, very gentle. I won't be stomping my foot down. And as well as like the trajectory to which you are doing that, like it's coming more at a, it's coming more parallel than like adjacent. It's, the strike is very gentle. It's very, very gentle. And then, so the heel will hit gently. And then once the ball of the foot hits the ground, explode.
Yeah.
So that's generally.
Yeah. That's kind of my experience as well. It's about managing the collision through the tension above the heel and the knee and the hip, so that you can roll that shin past that initial heel position, but then have that heel flat on the ground in order to anchor off of it and use it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So moving on from the barefooting itself, your style developed from very power oriented towards very flow oriented, and then kind of technical weird challenges, which is funny because I kind of went through a lot of those phases. Or I mean, I feel like I know who even I was telling you I was interviewing Leo, and you were talking about GOP and like going back to Leo's videos before he really started mostly doing nature stuff. He's got the giant baggy pants. He's doing the GOP style reverse vault, right? The Foskey reverse vault.
Yep.
I never really got into the GOP stuff as much as other people, but I went through that phase where I was really interested in the flow connections. And before that, it was all about the power. And then the Engis Mashenko, Andy Wool, Dusseldorf parkour scene, when Naeem went up to Germany, parkour creatively, like all that stuff was so much fun.
Yeah, so, the golden days of parkour.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, okay, you're now kind of you're specializing in a sense in the ascent and descent game, then to a lesser degree in the movement in trees right now. As far as the content you're putting out, is it really what most of your training looks like, or is kind of some of that other stuff still there in the background of your training? It's just not something you're highlighting in your social media.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something I don't really think about. I just like go to train and then I just things catch my eye, and I think just in within this season of my training, it's a sense of descents that really catch my eye.
Yeah.
And of course, I am still training. I call them like horizontal training. You're moving across this way instead of up and down.
Yeah.
And for sure, my movement looks more vertical nowadays. But I think it's ever changing, and I think it as far as athletes who've been training for 10 plus years, I feel like it just needs people need to dabble in as much as they can because it can get boring. But it's interesting because over the break, winter break that I just got back from, I was moving more horizontally than I had been in a while, and was really enjoying it. And I'm taking inspiration from the hula and dance and as well as surfing and stuff like that. More horizontal base movements, and seeing how I can just grow in that. I don't think there's an aim or a goal, but I think for majority of my parkour life, it has been, aimed at becoming more like, I don't know, European in my movement or urban. But now that, I think people are appreciating like movement and nature more, I'm like, okay, what are some things that we can take inspiration from? What are the things in nature that we can take inspiration from? What are things that already exist that we can take inspiration from? And I had like just a few comments passed back and forth between Eric Wolf and I, and he was telling me, I posted a video on these lemurs that were moving in a certain way, and I was like, oh, I'm so inspired by that, and I like applied some of that to my movement, and then he commented, oh yeah, I've been trying to copy those movements as well, and if you watch them, it's very similar to I think they're called the Sifaka lemurs.
Yeah. They're actually called shifak, which totally doesn't look like how it's pronounced. I believe that's how it's pronounced. But yeah, they're awesome. They're the kings of the like catback in the animal kingdom.
Yeah. So yeah, just taking a lot of inspiration from that sort of thing, and just enjoying the process. I think there's a lot that the parkour world, or just humanity in general, can learn from kind of looking backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there are a lot of things that exist that have had a little harder of a time like being passed down, and I think doing what I'm doing is almost like reconnecting me to that past in some way. In Hawaii, there's like the Hawaiians had to travel from other parts of Polynesia to find Hawaii, and how they found it, I could be wrong, is maybe some like scholar listening, but from what my understanding is, the now Hawaiians, they were sitting on the shores and they could see the tides coming off of their land, but in the water they could see a tide coming off of something in the distance, hundreds and thousands of miles away, and they knew there was land.
Yeah.
So they voyaged and they went out, and a lot of people think the Hawaiian people just stumbled upon the Hawaiian Islands or these islands and just like put down the roots there. But no, everything was very intentional and calculated and primal, and understanding the land, understanding nature. And so as they voyaged, they had to, one, look behind the boat and see the tides coming off of where they were coming from, and two, look in front of the boat and see the tides that was coming in front, and knowing, so they would have an idea of like where they're going, but also where they've come from. So I think similarly, like I feel as I'm discovering what I am discovering now, it's a lot of that idea within that. I've been doing parkour for a long time. Parkour is very futuristic forward movement, but also like when I'm doing Barefoot, it's looking back like, okay, there are things that exist before this that obviously haven't made it into our movement discipline yet. And I think those are important. So
yeah, I mean, that's very much aligned with evolve, move, play, right? That's, the idea is how do we evolve to move, right? And for me, moving in nature is obviously more reflective of our evolved nature than moving in the city. I kind of think of parkour as this like revolutionary act of reimagining the city as available for play, in the same way that kind of every kid will naturally interact with nature. But there's this weird way in which the parkour community fell into the trap of seeing it only as urban. Like for years, I would hear people call it urban obstacle coursing. I was like, it doesn't have to be urban, right? If you go back to the very early David Bell videos, he says, whether in the man-made or the natural environment. And like the earliest videos, there's a bunch of Fontaine Bleu and Sarcelles, as well as, at least in every, and it's interesting to me that it's still like a really small percentage of the parkour community that's exploring it. It's like I have my favorites on Instagram is just people who do parkour in nature. So it's you, Leo Urban, Eric Wolf, Lisa Schneider, Tarzan Movement, Alcock Bailey, Julia Close. I mean, it's like a dozen people, right? And then there's some folks who kind of explored it pretty deeply and then kind of that's not where they're at right now, but like Toby Seeger used to do more of it in nature. Now he's back into the climbing, which is taking him into nature. But for me, that's what's super intriguing is how we evolve to move with nature. Like the swing game is really big right now, or maybe it was a couple of years ago. I don't know. It has been big. And then I'm training at a Ninja Warrior gym right now, which is like, I realize the Ninja Warrior is basically just weird laches combined with campusing climbing and a little bit of balance and tic-tac work. Right. So it's just laches. All these funky laches, which is fun. It's nice to be able to like have weird, challenging laches to work on. But like I got really into brachiating, like Gibbons. And so I found this line in Seattle where I could actually do a 360 brachiation around a tree. For me, that was one of the coolest things to ever discover. I'd love to take you there one of these days when you come to Seattle. We'll go tree. Because that's it. Like the whole reason we have shoulders that can do these things is because we are evolved from brachiating apes, right? So that's cool. So you said you're taking inspiration from surfing, you're taking inspiration from hula. It sounds like kind of Hawaiian culture has really become an important touchstone for you. Did you grow up in Hawaii or did you adopt Hawaii as an adult?
Yeah, it's a good question. My mom is from Hawaii. I have several generations on her side that from there. My parents just got work. So my dad was born in Taiwan, raised in the Philippines, and then moved to New York City. My parents met in Oregon, and then they found work in mainland China and then Hong Kong. So I had grown up visiting Hawaii and New York City and Oregon like almost every year of my life, because that's where my parents, their families, their friends were from. So, but I did grow up in Hong Kong, and let's see, what else do I need to add? I'm not by blood Hawaiian, but my great grandmother was 100% Hawaiian, but she adopted my grandmother, who was ethnically Chinese. So though she was Chinese, she was raised Hawaiian. She was taught the language. She was taught the way of the land. She was taught, to read and write and all these things. And so moving to Hawaii, I just felt, I tell people, I grew up in Hong Kong, and that in a lot of senses does feel like home to me, but I never truly felt at home there. Again, like as I mentioned earlier, I didn't like the city until I found parkour, hence the name For the Love of the City. And so when I did move to Hawaii when I was 16, it was like it truly felt like I had moved home. Like it truly felt like I was in the place that I was meant to be. I was all these things that I had kind of like experienced to a very small degree in Hong Kong now was my life, you know. I always liked to like be in nature and be in the mountains and, you know, daydream about being in the mountains and feeling the wind hit my face. And now that I was in Hawaii, I was able to do all those things. And all the friends I had met were all into movement as well. And so, you know, again, we're running around in the woods barefoot, jumping on cliffs and doing all that. And so it almost felt like a rebirth, like moving from the city to the jungle. And it's funny because now I'm moving from the jungle to the city. And so
the jungle into LA, right?
Yeah, it's kind of full circle. And I think there's something almost beautiful about that. So yeah, I do take a lot of inspiration from having lived in Hawaii for as long as I have now, and do feel the things that were taught to me through my grandma, who was raised by Hawaiians. Yeah, I do feel that responsibility. That's also part of Hawaiian culture, like, you know, taking on this responsibility not only for yourself but for those who have come before you, your ancestors, your people who have laid down the foundations for the life that you're able to live now. Yeah. And so, yeah, definitely important things to me.
So are you practicing surfing, practicing hula, or just kind of like watching videos, going to events? Like how do those things kind of enter?
Yeah. I've been surfing for, let's say, 6 or so years now. And then I don't do hula, but I know a lot of people that do hula. I know a good amount of you know what it means, what the purpose of hula, the storytelling that is involved. So yeah.
Okay. So how do you feel like surfing has impacted your parkour?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's funny because if I look back in the last, I don't know, 5 or so years of my life, and if someone were to ask me like, oh, what has helped your parkour? I would tell them not doing parkour, doing other things, because parkour gives you such a strong foundation for doing everything else in life that is movement based, any sport or whatever. And so like surfing has helped me with my flow, like learning to feel water beneath me, around me, the land around me, and moving in conjunction to that. So a lot of surfing feels like the complete opposite to parkour. Parkour, you come in, you have control over everything, your body in the space, you know the surfaces, you have control. You are basically the mastermind or God in your little world, and you can manipulate in whatever way you can. But surfing's the opposite. You have a little board, you go into the ocean, and the ocean is the mastermind, God, or whatever. And you can have as much skill as you want, and you know, you're gonna have like incredible skill, but if you're not paying attention to the ocean and listening to it, you're gonna get destroyed. So I love that surfing, a lot of it is about giving up control, allowing the wave to carry you, and you just like doing a little dance on the wave, basically. And so that has carried over to parkour. Like, okay, you know, what does my movement look like if I allow this environment to shape the movements that I put into it, rather than I show up like, oh, I can do I have 20 moves in my toolbox, which ones can I take out and apply, you know? But go into space like, okay, what are some unique or interesting obstacles that I can use that will shape the way I move? And I've spoken with, I don't know if I've spoken with Eric Wolf, but I see the way that he trains, and he trains with that methodology as well, and as well as Luke Albrecht. They go into space and like, oh, you know, what unique ways is this environment shaping me? So that's carried over. So that's surfing, and then trail running has impacted my movement like quite a lot in the past few years, just with footwork, like being able to think like very quickly. Every step you take, you could. And in Hawaii, the trails I like to run are like the rims, of like dormant volcanoes or rims of mountains. And if you slip and fall, you're gonna fall 100 feet. So you need to be very calculated, precise, and think like within an instant so that you don't get hurt. And so that has helped me parkour. If I'm running around, I can make a last minute adjustment to my movement, as I please, basically.
It's interesting. So I come from a martial arts background, and within the martial arts, I was exposed to the idea of aliveness, which I believe was originally coined by Bruce Lee, but it was popularized, kind of really defined by Matt Thornton. The idea of aliveness is essentially that you can practice patterns of movement as much as you want, and you won't be able to use them in an actual fight until you've really dealt with an opponent's real energy, their real timing, their real rhythm, right? So you have to do some sort of fighting like activity to be able to fight, right? You can't fight all out, but you have to have real resistance to learn to fight. Mm-hmm. So I started getting interested in this idea of what is the kind of complete approach to movement back in 2006. And I wanted to sort of bring aliveness into parkour. We were always talking about parkour as a reach or escape activity. Mm-hmm. But we were never trying to actually just reach something on site, right? Or trying to escape from something real. It's like, well, chase things. And so we started incorporating that in 2008. I can't remember the exact timing. I feel like I was definitely already thinking a lot about this, but then Take Matthews Palmer released, Rage Frubling, and that was like, oh yes, this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I want to do. And we built a lot of games based off of that. But I've only been surfing maybe half a dozen times. One of the things that I really felt was like it's so alive. Yeah. Right. It's so moment to moment, right? In parkour, you can plan a line. Yeah. And you can, and one thing I think parkour athletes need to do a lot more of is not stop when the line doesn't go as planned. Yeah. Like learn to adapt secondarily. But in surfing, basically, it's all online because the wave is going to feel different. Yeah. In every moment, right? It's like you can't like get up on a line and be like, okay, the wave is going to be at this speed and this height 5 seconds from now, which is going to be the perfect opportunity for me to do this, board switch or flip or whatever it is that you're going to do. It's all about that moment to moment reaction. Yeah. So I felt that a little bit when I was actually surfing, but I actually felt it most just trying to get the surfboard out. Yeah. Like just being in the water and getting like smacked by these waves, getting, this, one of the times I went surfing was on the Oregon coast and there was this current running across the beach. And so we were fighting the current to stay in the spot where the break was. Yep. Yeah. And so it's just this incredible, it was such a fascinating and rich physical experience. For like, oh, this is going to feed me so much adaptability, so much resilience in my movement to experience this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. People think surfing is like, oh, you just stand up on the wave and you ride. And no, it's like, it's a whole nother world. It really is. Like everything, you need to know the ocean, you need to know the tides, you need to know, which way the wave's going to hit, whether it's going to break or not, all these things. And I think that's what I appreciate. It's like I become very minuscule in the grand scheme of surfing. Whereas parkour, it's like we're basically like God.
Yeah. We can impose our vision in a sense. But the other thing you said that I really picked up on in that was this idea of the parkour that is responsive to the space. Like this is something that I really love. Like this is one of the reasons why I really love the stuff in nature, because I feel like it's harder to impose.
Yeah.
a vision on nature, right? It's like you just might not have any Kong precisions in this specific space, right? You're just gonna, it's just not, it doesn't make sense. But what can you find? How can you react creatively with it? And I remember like, it was Ryan Doyle, and apologies for Ryan Doyle for calling him out on this, but he kind of he symbolized for me the trend of like parkour as just tricking off of platforms, where it didn't really matter what the platforms were or where they were. And I think Red Bull sent him to like a Mayan temple, and he did like a cart full off.
I think I remember that. Yeah.
Landed and it was like, this is exactly the line that he would do off of platforms in England. There's the scenery has changed, but there was zero adaptation of the way of moving to the scenery. Right. Whereas like, for me, I'm super inspired right now by like Matt McCreary's movement, because, he's in trees. His movement is really weird and unique in the trees in a specific way, utilizing the affordances of the trees. He's on hay bales in Northern Ireland, and he's doing absurd stuff that only works because it's hay bales, right?
Yeah.
And I think, to me, that's where like parkour is most rich, actually, is when we are actually behaving more like surfers.
Yeah.
And less like gymnasts.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess I'll just leave. You can spring off that if you want, but I'm curious, in the parkour community, whose movement is inspiring to you now? Who are you looking at and saying, okay, that makes me want to go train. I want to try that thing. I want to play in that space.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if I'm like, there's no one that comes to mind right now. Like it's funny because if you were to ask me any other time in my journey, I would be able to name up all these different names. But like currently now, I feel like I'm just like on my own journey, immersing myself in what I'm trying to do, that like I haven't really thought of like other people that, I mean, there's also always people that I think are doing really like cool and crazy things, like Joe Scandred. I think is one of them, like Dom Tomato.
Yeah.
I really like Benj Cave movement. Yeah, I don't know.
It's interesting because I guess I associate you in my head with Leo Urban because of the nature stuff, and then because of the ascent and descent stuff. Like I feel like there's a kind of little group of guys who are all really good at that, who are all specializing in that. So there's Tom Coppola, there's you, there's Oliver Thorpe, there's Shane. I can't remember Shane's last name. Shane from Cambridge.
Yeah.
There's Momo.
Momo like APK or something.
PK. And it's like kind of like that's the crew that's really taking the ascent game super high. And then obviously Joe Scandred is the king of descents. And I feel like there's a lot of guys doing descents like 2 years ago, but I'm not really thinking of many people who are really specializing in descents besides Joe, right?
Yeah. And I definitely take inspiration from all those guys, but at the same time, like I do, for me, like what I'm doing feels very different because I'm scared of heights. So everything that I try to do is within like generally a limit of generally within 2 stories. If I do a 3rd story, that's like, it's just like, it's another like level of like challenge to me, because I know I can take a drop from 2 stories and be fine. Yeah. Once it's 2 to 3 stories, I know that I need to do at least one move that is risking myself. And I generally don't like to put myself in those situations. Of course, it's very case by case. Like if the architecture environment is very tight and closed, and if you fall from the 3rd story, you're just going to land on the 2nd story, then that's fine. But like I see Joe stuff and I love what he's doing, but I'm like, there's no way I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
I'd stand up there and just I would just say no, like no, I wouldn't do that. And then there's like Oliver, he does like super rapid urban climbs. But again, like he's climbing to a height where I probably wouldn't climb myself. Like I'd probably go halfway. So I think as far as like what I look for, it's like I try to look for climbs and descents that I can do rapidly. I think that's like the main factor. Like how fast can I do it? And if it's not fast and it kind of just doesn't interest me, of course that's case by case. There are some things that I'll allow, like if there's one movement within the climb that does require a more technical move and it causes me to slow down, then I'm okay with that. But I don't necessarily enjoy like the slower climbs. And I think like Shane, he does a lot of more like very technical, more slow climbs. Of course, he can climb very fast, but like those things don't necessarily interest me, like, to be honest. Of all and then of course there's Leo Urban, like the stuff he does, like again, no, I wouldn't go that high. I just wouldn't go that high. So I of course I take inspiration from all these guys, but at the same time, I think the big factor is like they are very, very comfortable at heights that I'm not comfortable at. And my level of comfort has definitely increased over the last 2 years. But I'm not really like aiming, or my goal isn't to be able to like climb higher or descend, more stories. And it's funny because I enjoy ascending way more than descending because I don't have to look down. So I don't see the height.
Yeah.
Because it's funny because like I'll do some of these ascents I'll do them and it's no problem. I'm not scared of the height at all. As soon as I get to the top and I look down, like, oh yeah, that's high.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of the final series of questions here. I'm always curious to know what like a normal training week looks like.
Yeah.
A lot, which I know is always hard because it's like, well, there are no normal training weeks. Like you've got finals, you're in Hawaii, you're in LA, it's different. But I'd like to dig into your training. I guess I have another kind of question about how you cross training as well. But what does a training week look like?
Yeah. I get asked this, and I think it surprises people. I only train parkour like once a week. If I get a second session in, that's really good. But mainly in LA, we have our Saturday jams. So that's usually the one time of the week that I do train. But it's like we train from 12 to 5. So I just came off a break and I was training a lot more, but those sessions usually only last 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half. And so if you clump those all together, I'm doing the same amount of training in one day, basically. Then of course, if I get another day in the week, then that's even better. But a regular week now looks like weight training / conditioning in the gym 3 to 4 times.
Okay.
The Saturday jam, and then maybe one other session, maybe like an hour and a half, 2 hours, like in the week. And then I try to go on some sort of short hike once a week. I'm right next to the mountains, so try to do that. And then I will try to surf every few weeks. I would love to surf once a week, but I'm about an hour away from the beach, so it's a little more challenging. But if I can surf like once a month, that's pretty good.
Nice. So what does your strength training and conditioning look like?
Yeah, it looks different depending on what season I'm in. Right now I'm in kind of like a a functional movement type of training. It's interesting because, I follow a lot of these functional movement people who are super into that. And I watch them and I'm like, I love what you guys are doing and the movements you're doing, but like that's only good. You're becoming more functional with your body in the gym, but like you're missing the most important thing, which is to take it outside.
Yeah.
And I watch them like, wow, all those movements are parkour movements, but you're just doing them to a smaller degree in the gym. Like,
Yeah.
I watch a lot of guys who do a lot of mobility and all these things, and they're doing all these like animal style movements. And I'm like, wow, that's great. Like if you started doing parkour, you would be great, but you stop at the gym.
Yeah, the mentality. Have to develop mentality. Who are some of the functional movement kind of inspirations for you?
Yeah, right now I follow. There are a couple. Shoot, I think they're called. I believe their names are Jay and Rose.
Okay.
The guy is Jay. Oh, I guess that's just his name. J Rose Phase 6, but him and his wife, they do a lot of like movement and mobility, and they both follow me. So
Okay.
I would love to just be like, guys,
Come do some parkour.
come do some parkour. Like everything you're doing is like, I love it. Like you're really preaching this to an audience who they just need to move, but like if you really want to like fully embrace what you're teaching, you need to do it outside. You need to do parkour. You need to be interacting with the environment. Otherwise, you're kind of just like you're limiting yourself to a space. And so I've been using more functional movements now to see, what kind of carryover those have. Because again, I watch these guys, I'm like, oh, these would be such great movements to do if you did parkour. So I'm kind of like taking inspiration from those
kettlebell
things.
stuff, mace stuff, ground flow stuff, like mobility stuff. Like, can you give me what like functional? Like, I'm thinking functional patterns. Naudi Aguilera. I'm thinking David Weck. I'm thinking DJ Murakami. I'm thinking like that's actually a huge range of things that someone might throw under that bin.
Yeah. I do follow David Weck. I have a rope somewhere. Do that stuff. Lots of kettlebells. It's mostly implementing more kettlebells into my training. But I think generally speaking, my training is mostly. I think the most accurate term is power building. Yeah. It's
working with kettlebells, doing not just strict snatches and cleans and swings, but doing like interesting patterns and waves and getting into those corners. My favorite guy in that space is my buddy Cliff Harsky, but there's a lot of people who are kind of taking the kettlebell and exploring its multiplanar effects. And finding ways to kind of be more athletic with a kettlebell. Is that kind of what you're doing?
I think so. Yeah. Like there's definitely like parts of the body that you don't really reach doing parkour. And there's definitely, in the gym, you can reach those areas. I think it's safer. Like what I love about lifting is that to me, it's like parkour without the risk of injury. Like rarely can I say that I've done parkour and have gone 100%.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
It's like, obviously you want to stay within the limits of your body and be safe. But so rarely am I ever going to push myself 100% to do something, because I think then the risk of injury is much higher. Whereas in the gym, it's like I can push 100% on any lift and like exert 100% of my force and energy all the time. And I think that's what I love about lifting. It's like you don't need to think. Parkour, I'm always thinking.
Risk management. Yeah.
Exactly. And lifting, like, okay, all I have to do is move this weight up and down in one plane of motion. But obviously now doing more kettlebell, so more planes of motion, but still it's like, yeah.
Do you have any kind of specific goals you're trying to achieve within your strength? Do you like track metrics like, okay, my squat is here and I know that's going to have this impact on my jump. My weighted pull-up is here and I know that like I need to keep it there in order to be able to have the
that I want. Quick answer is no.
Okay.
Like my weight training is more, I would say it's like in par. It's like I have the same passion for lifting as I do for parkour. And I definitely do it more now. It's just less taxing on my body. But I've talked to Ryan Ford, and he's the master of like knowing what numbers are going to maximize your performance. And he told me that I've surpassed all the numbers that would help me in parkour. So basically, I don't know if that means my weight training is like the most optimized, but like goals have always been like deadlift 500, which I've hit, bench 315, and right now I'm like at 280, and like squat 400, but I'm at 350 right now. So
your body weight's 170-ish?
It is now, yeah. It's normally like 162, 165.
So yeah. So 350 is pretty good. I don't think you really need more from a parkour perspective.
Yeah, it's literally just because I want it.
Yeah.
That's it.
So let's back up for a second. So let me just ask you, are you going to go back to Hawaii during the off season, or have you been going back to Hawaii when you're not in school?
Yeah, I've been going back to my breaks. Yeah.
Okay. When you're in Hawaii, does your training change substantially?
Oh yeah. I don't lift.
Okay, so you don't lift when you're in Hawaii. How often do you train parkour when you're in Hawaii?
I'm in Hawaii. I train 2 to 3 times a week, and I'm also surfing as much as I can, also hiking, also doing calisthenics. So it's just a lot.
So it's like a couple hours a day basically of some kind of physical activity, but it's mixed between trail running, hiking, surfing, calisthenics, and parkour.
Yeah.
Would you say that's been fairly typical, like for when you're not in school for maybe the last 10 years, or has it varied a lot?
Let's say that's pretty typical. Yeah, pretty typical. But it is different if I don't go to Hawaii, like say if I go to Europe, I will just do parkour.
Yeah,
I won't be doing any of the other things unless someone wants to go on a hike or I would just be doing parkour. So it's just,
it's kind of like an on season for a parkour athlete to go on a, it's like you go to Europe to meet up with parkour people. It's like a 6-week parkour tournament, basically.
Yeah.
Not gonna be doing anything else. Okay, excellent. So I guess the last thing I'm curious about is, have you played around with bouldering at all, given the style you've picked up?
Oh yeah. That's one thing I forgot to mention. Before parkour, I was a climber.
Okay.
It was just indoor though, top rope indoor, and my coach was. I was at the point where my coach was like, "Oh, you have a gift. You should compete." And I was kind of working towards that, but I got bored. I got bored of going to the same place, just moving up and down a plane, and I was like, "There's got to be more to this." And I love climbing. Okay, and I'm I love climbing, obviously, because that's more of my style now. But I love that parkour is a more all-encompassing, more holistic form of movement. I think the future is like, I've seen this in Germany. A German guy, Mark. He trains in these gyms where it's like a climbing gym and a parkour gym.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think that's the future, because I tell people who aren't familiar with parkour, like parkour is basically a mix of climbing and skateboarding. Like,
Yeah. I like to think of it the opposite way. I think parkour is the earth sport, right? Rock climbing is just bouldering is just parkour, where you use a really narrow set of obstacles and specialized shoes. So it's parkour without the jumps, right? And the running. Surfing is parkour on a board on water. Skiing is parkour. Skateboarding is parkour using a skateboard, right? Because fundamentally, it's all exploratory locomotion.
Yeah.
But the natural way for us to explore locomotion is with the body and the environment and using all of the capacities of the body. The one thing we don't do in parkour is swim. And that's like a major missing thing. Swim and run for long distances.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for describing it to the average person, right, it's like, rock climbing plus running, jumping, vaulting is a pretty decent way to imagine taking the vertical and just making it everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. So I've definitely been climbing a lot more in the last few years. I'm actually planning to join a gym here, and I climbed a lot this past summer. And what I learned was like, oh, actually, like similar to why I like lifting, like you don't need to think as much. That's what I do when I do parkour. Like when I'm climbing, all I need to think about is moving on one plane up and down. And it's mad, and it's so I don't need to think. I can just have fun. And I think, yeah, parkour it's still fun to me, but the way I train parkour, it's more of a discipline. I'm there to master my mind and my body.
Yeah.
And I'm not even necessarily there to have fun. Like, I may not even allow myself that release of dopamine when I achieve something that I want to do. I'm like, oh, it just had to be done. I saw it in my head. I've done it in the spiritual plane of my mind, and I just need to put my body into that space and carry that motion, that line out physically. Then it becomes complete in both spheres of the spiritual plane and the physical plane. Whereas climbing is like, oh, I'm just here to have fun. Like I'm actually just playing.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny. Yeah, I think over time it's really valuable to allow yourself to play in the primary discipline as well. But it's nice if you can pick it up in the other places. I had a health problem that like it's been something I've been dealing with for 7 years, but it got particularly bad over the last couple of years. And one thing that happened was that like I just never felt playful at all, ever. So I was training, and it was always just pure discipline because nothing was fun. Like literally nothing was fun.
Yeah.
And so now I'm finally healing, and it's like such an interesting experience to like be at the gym and be like, I want to do this thing, not because like it's the discipline or it's the goal or it's the whatever. It's just because like that seems fun. I did a Ninja Warrior competition this weekend. And it was interesting because like going into it, I was like, I chose to do it because the idea was if I get a chance to compete in parkour, there's not that many opportunities. So I can cross train, I can get some competition exposure, right?
Yeah.
It's a nice way to like do some concentrated work on building the upper body aspects of the skills.
Yeah.
But like going into it, I was like at the gym working my parkour skills, and I'd go over like on the Ninja Warrior obstacles and mess around and be like, I don't like this. I don't want to be constrained to these weird objects that I never experience in real life. Like, why am I doing this to myself? And then when I went to the competition, it was awesome. I had so much fun. It was just such a like, I'm not a Ninja Warrior athlete. I'm a parkour athlete. So it's totally just a gas, right? To be like, what is this weird challenge? And like to be out, and the cool thing about the format was like, you don't get to try it, right? So to like show up and have to on site all these weird challenges was super fun. The last question I wanted to ask you about the bouldering was, so you've done calisthenics and you've done bouldering. How have you noticed the kind of impact on your expression of strength in parkour when you're more focused on the bouldering versus the calisthenics? And how has it impacted the rest of your parkour training when you're more focused on one or the other?
Okay. So bouldering versus calisthenics.
Yeah. Or strength work, upper body strength work.
Yeah. I don't know if I can like make a distinction between the two as to how each of them has helped me, but like for sure as a whole, like I have full confidence in knowing that my body can hold itself up like with one arm or this and that. And I think that's what I love about like climbing parkour, because it requires a level of strength. Like I think a lot of parkour, it's like if you have the balls, you can do it, but it's like climbing, it's like, yeah, you could climb, but like as far as safety goes, like if you want to be able to do it and be safe, like there is a level of strength that I feel like people who want to get into more of, I don't know what I call it, climbing parkour, like you need to have, like I feel like you need to be able to do a one-arm pull-up. Like I feel like that's very important. Like the fact that I know that I can pull myself up with one arm allows me to do so much more, and allows me to climb with so much more confidence, knowing that if something does happen, I will be fine because I can catch myself.
Yeah.
So I suppose like, doing calisthenics, knowing I can, this, I think even with calisthenics, man, it's so hard to measure, but like, I don't know if it requires more strength than climbing, but depending on how you train. I think climbing hasn't helped me strength wise, except for strength in my fingers. I think I was already strong enough doing calisthenics and doing
built the strength of calisthenics.
Yeah. What bouldering has brought to my movement has been the finger strength and the ability to adapt my body into more positions. Because when I do parkour, I think my chest is facing whatever obstacle I'm trying to get over. But with climbing, it's not always the case. Sometimes you're wedging yourself and your chest is facing away or this or that. And those are things that I hadn't really like experimented or thought of prior to climbing as much as I have now. There's a climb I did at UW. Justin Sweeney did it first.
Yeah.
But I took a slightly different approach. I did I think it's called smear, but I jumped to a rail and then to this corner, and I had to like I had to jump and like get my body into this sideways position. Whereas before climbing, I probably would have tried to just like cat grab and then like, grab here, and then, I'm facing, my chest is facing whatever it is I'm trying to go. But climbing was helping me like adjust and use my body in different ways and put my fingers into weird like crevices or holes to move. But yeah, I can say for sure, like the strength that I have allows me to move with so much more confidence. And a lot of people say, "Oh, you're an animal." I'm like, well, like a lot of it is just strength. Like if you were just like a little stronger, like you can do this too. You're just not there yet.
It's interesting. So the reason I asked that question is because the question is like, what's the optimal way to develop strength, right? Like you've probably observed this, but like, Ryan and I talk about this a lot. There's a lot of really high level parkour athletes who never weightlift, and they come in and like on the first day they'll deadlift 1.5, even 2 times body weight, right?
Yeah.
It's like the strength came through the primary sport. So one of the basic rules that I kind of follow in my thinking with Evolve Move Play is this rule of like always train at the highest level of complexity that allows you to get the adaptation that you're seeking.
Mm-hmm.
As you get more specific with adaptations and you get higher up the hierarchy of what you're trying to achieve, you have to have like more carved and specific training. But if you try to like just start at like highly specific, you're not going to get the same adaptations. So like a thought experiment I give is imagine take 2 identical brothers who start with the ability to do 5 pull-ups and climb like a V2.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them trains only in the bouldering gym. He just goes in and does the hardest bouldering routes that he can do, 3 days a week for an hour and a half. The other goes in and does like a calisthenics workout for the same amount of time, focused on trying to build up his pull-ups.
Yeah.
So at the end of the year, both can do more pull-ups, right? Theoretically, both get a little bit stronger at the climbing, but who does the other one's stuff better?
Yeah.
My sense is the boulder is going to be much closer to achieving the amount of pull-ups that the pull-up brother has than vice versa.
Yeah.
And more than that, the boulder would also be better at parkour.
Yeah.
Right. He could do stuff. He could adapt. He has more overall kinesthetic intelligence to apply to something. So, obviously it depends on where you spent your time in the beginning of your journey, what's going to do it. But that's why I asked that question, because I think, right, like getting a 1-arm pull-up, should you just do pull-ups, or maybe you should like do a bunch of climbing of a variety, and then once you are getting close in the journey, then you go and you like put your dedicated time that's specific to that, because you're not going to get a 1-arm pull-up really without dedicated work. But I think you can get 15 pull-ups without ever doing a pull-up. I think you can do just from climbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your sense for that? And then I'll let you go. I know we're running.
Yeah. No. It's all good. Sorry, can you repeat the question? My mind.
I mean, so I was just laying out the theory that we work with, and I was just curious if it accords with your experience, right? Having been around a lot of boulders, a lot of rock climbers, a lot of parkour athletes, a lot of surfers, right? Like, do you see this trend that we can get a lot of highly developed physical qualities through very complex, chaotic, freeform sports? But there is a point at which we have to add that ancillary training. And the interesting thing is, how do we balance that? Like, not doing so much of it that's actually taking away from our primary sport, and choosing when the appropriate time is to bring that in. And so, just your thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, those are definitely, things I think about. Exactly, like what is the optimal way for me to train, weight training, that way it carries over. And I think I'm past that. I just lift because I like lifting. I do parkour because I like doing parkour. I trail run because I like to trail, and I surf because I like to surf but I do see like everything carrying over into everything else. And as far as like the 1-arm pull-up question, I never really trained them. Like, one day I could just do it. But
that's pretty beastly. I've had that experience. Like Tyson Cheka, who co-founded Parkour Visions with me, like he just did a lot of rock climbing, a lot of parkour, and it was like, okay, let's train you to do 1-arm pull-up. So then we did like 3 weeks of weighted pull-ups, and he had it.
Yeah.
Justin Sweeney, we got him his 1-arm pull-up pretty soon. I cannot do a 1-arm pull-up. I'm also 220, so it makes it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. I think a lot of like 1-arm pull-up, front lever, back lever, like I never like trained those movements specifically. It was more like I would just do calisthenics, and then I was like, oh, let me see where my front lever is, and I'm like, oh, okay, here. And then eventually one day I could just do it, and I'd be like, oh, it just clicked. Something just clicked, and I was like, oh, I just needed to engage this part of my body or this or that. So yeah, I don't. I think for me it's just a matter of moving and moving in as many different forms as you can, and just enjoying the process, and the carryover from each discipline is going to carry over for sure, like within parkour, within bouldering, climbing, everything else. I wouldn't say, at least now, like I'm past the point of doing other things to specifically impact my parkour. It's more so I do these things because I enjoy them, and I know they will somehow make these other movements better.
Nice. That's a good place to be. So, yeah, got to wrap up now. It was really fun to chat and get a chance to meet each other, Matt. It's just Matt Jang on Instagram. That's pretty much the only place that people can find you, right?
Yeah, parkour.jang.
Yep,
Yeah.
there you go.
I'm still For the Love of the City on YouTube. I think that's going to change in a few weeks, but
okay. So the YouTube might be revived. Good to know. Excellent. And yeah, really thanks for your insights and sharing your journey.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I appreciate coming on and asking me these questions, and it definitely helps. I enjoy this because it helps me formulate answers that I don't necessarily think I have. Like if I'm just like out and about,
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. Bye-bye.
Yeah.